I wake up before dawn to the sound of wind tearing through the valley, the kind of wind that tells you a serious winter storm is close. I grab my coffee and step outside, already thinking about the long hours ahead. Then I see my driveway and my stomach drops. My snowplow truck is sitting there like a crime scene. Tires slashed down to the rims, windows forced open and shattered. The hood bent and twisted, the engine block ruined beyond repair. Thick, dark fluid spreads across the concrete, frozen mid-creep, like someone wanted to make sure the damage was unmistakable. This isn't kids messing around. This isn't random vandalism. For months, the HOA has been sending me warnings about this truck being an eyesore. Letters, threats, complaints about property values. And now, just hours before the biggest storm of the season, the one vehicle responsible for keeping their private roads open is deliberately destroyed. The irony is almost cruel. The same people who wanted the truck gone are about to be trapped without it. As I stand there in the cold, staring at what's left of my livelihood, one thought settles in hard and heavy. This wasn't about rules or appearances anymore. Someone wanted control. Someone wanted leverage. And they were willing to burn everything to get it. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? To understand how it got that far, I have to rewind a bit. I'd lived in the mountain community of Ridgeview Summit for close to a decade by then, long enough to know every curve in the road and every neighbor who kept to themselves through the long winters. It's a gated development tucked outside a quiet Colorado county most people couldn't point to on a map. Beautiful views, heavy snow, and one critical flaw. There's only a single paved access road that connects the neighborhood to the county highway. My property sits right at that junction. Anyone coming in or out of Ridgeview Summit passes by my driveway, whether they like it or not. I didn't move there by accident. When I bought the place, I did my homework. The deed included a recorded easement that predated the HOA by decades, clearly allowing commercial vehicles to be parked on the property. That mattered to me because I run a snow removal business. It's not some big operation with a fleet and logos plastered everywhere. It's just honest work. Long nights, early mornings, showing up when everyone else is still asleep and the weather's at its worst. Around here, that kind of reliability isn't a luxury. It's survival. Years after I moved in, Ridgeview Summit formed an HOA. At first, things were smooth. In fact, the board approached me directly about handling winter plowing for the neighborhood roads. They knew my setup, they knew my truck, they knew my reputation. We signed a seasonal contract with fair rates and clear language spelling out what happens during extreme weather or equipment failure. Everything was clean, professional, and mutual. For a while, it worked exactly as intended. The trouble started when Elaine Parker became HOA president. She was polished, confident, and obsessed with appearances. From her first meeting, she talked nonstop about uniform aesthetics and protecting property values. At first, I didn't think much of it. HOAs talk like that all the time. But then the violation notices started showing up in my mailbox. The first one said my truck was an eyesore. The second warned that commercial vehicles weren't permitted. The third mentioned fines. Each time I responded the same way: calm, polite, documented. I sent copies of my deed, highlighted the easement language, and even included a written confirmation from a real estate attorney stating plainly that my parking was legal and protected. None of it mattered. The letters kept coming, each one colder than the last. Elaine stopped responding directly and started copying the HOA attorney. The tone shifted from inquiry to accusation, like I was deliberately breaking rules instead of exercising a right that existed long before the HOA ever did. I still didn't raise my voice. I didn't retaliate. I told myself this was just bureaucratic stubbornness, that eventually facts would win. Then came the meeting. It was a regular HOA gathering, recorded like all the others. Residents sat folding their arms and staring at their phones while Elaine went through her agenda. When the topic of ongoing violations came up, she mentioned my truck by name. She talked about it like it was a personal insult to the neighborhood, not a piece of equipment that literally kept their roads usable. At one point, she said something that made my head snap up. She smiled, laughed lightly, and said the truck would be handled one way or another. A few people chuckled. Others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. No one asked what she meant. No one pushed back. The meeting moved on. I remember driving home afterward with a tight feeling in my chest that I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like a warning bell going off somewhere deep in my gut. I saved the meeting recording that night, not because I planned to use it, but because something about her tone felt wrong. In hindsight, that moment was the line everything crossed. Because silence has weight. When people with authority say reckless things and no one challenges them, it sends a message. It tells them they're untouchable. It tells them they can escalate without consequences. And it tells everyone else that whatever happens next will be quietly tolerated. At the time, I didn't know how bad it would get. I just knew one thing for certain. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about power. And power, when it goes unchecked, rarely stops on its own. After that meeting, the pressure stopped pretending to be polite. The notices from the HOA didn't just continue, they hardened. The language changed from concern to non-compliance. Deadlines appeared where there hadn't been any before. Fines were mentioned casually, as if they were inevitable. Every letter managed to dance around one key fact: my easement. It was never denied outright, just ignored, as if refusing to name it would somehow make it disappear. The HOA attorney got involved next. His emails were carefully worded, dense with legal phrasing, and oddly selective. He cited sections of the bylaws, referenced community standards, and warned of escalating penalties, but never once addressed the document that mattered most. I could tell exactly what they were doing, trying to exhaust me, pressure me into compliance, or push me into making a mistake they could use later, so I did the opposite. I documented everything. Every email was saved. Every letter was scanned. Meeting recordings were backed up in multiple places. I started keeping a simple log: dates, times, who said what, and how. I didn't respond emotionally. I didn't threaten. I didn't show up at meetings to argue. I answered only when necessary, and always in writing. If they wanted a paper trail, I was happy to give them one. While all of this was brewing, the weather started turning ugly. By mid-month, every forecast was flashing warnings. A stalled system was moving in from the west, heavy with moisture and cold air. The kind of storm that doesn't dump snow all at once, but just keeps coming. Day after day. The kind that overwhelms plow schedules and turns mountain roads into traps if they aren't cleared quickly and consistently. I knew what that meant for me: long shifts, little sleep, being on call around the clock. I went over my truck inch by inch, fluids topped off, blades checked, hydraulics tested, chains inspected. I treated that truck like a lifeline because for the community, it was. The night before the storm hit, I parked it in the same spot it had always been: visible, legal, unapologetic. The next morning, I stepped outside and found what was left of it. There's a moment after something catastrophic happens where your brain tries to reject it. You look again, hoping you misunderstood what you're seeing. That didn't last long. The damage was thorough, intentional. Someone had taken their time. This wasn't a smash and run. It was a message. I didn't touch anything. I didn't even step closer than necessary. I went back inside, grabbed my phone, and called the sheriff's department. The deputy arrived faster than I expected, probably because of the storm forecast. He walked the perimeter slowly, crouched to look at the tires, peered under the hood, and shook his head. He didn't talk much at first, just took photos, asked basic questions, and listened. When he asked if I'd had any recent disputes with anyone, I didn't hesitate. I told him about the HOA, about the notices, about the threats. And then I did something that clearly caught his attention. I handed him the recording from that meeting. He listened to it in his patrol car. When he came back, his expression was different, more focused. He told me plainly that this didn't look random. It looked targeted, deliberate. He assured me it would be investigated as such. As he left, snow began falling in earnest. It didn't take long for the calls to start. At first, they were indirect. Emails from the HOA management company asking for an update on plowing schedules. Then calls from board members. None of them asked if I was okay. None of them mentioned the vandalism. They just wanted to know when the roads would be cleared. When I told them the truth, that the truck was destroyed and I couldn't plow, the silence on the line was almost audible. Then came the pushback. They asked if I had a backup. They suggested I figure something out. One person even hinted that contract obligations didn't disappear just because of an incident. I reminded them calmly of the force majeure clause they had signed. I told them law enforcement was involved. I told them I would not operate without safe equipment. That's when the tone shifted completely. The messages got sharper. Accusations crept in, suggestions that I was exaggerating. Questions about whether the damage was really that bad. One email stopped just short of implying I was using the situation to my advantage. By the time the snow was piling up and the roads were already becoming dangerous, I understood something clearly. The HOA wasn't panicking because of the storm. They were panicking because they were losing control. And when people who are used to authority realize it no longer works, they tend to escalate in ways that reveal exactly who they are. Elaine didn't waste time pretending to be concerned. Her first call came late that afternoon, right as the snow began falling harder. Her voice was clipped, controlled, the way someone sounds when they're already convinced they're in the right. She said she'd heard about the incident with my truck and asked if I was certain the damage was as severe as I claimed. When I told her it was undrivable and part of an active investigation, she sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. Then she crossed a line. She suggested that maybe I was exaggerating, that maybe I'd let my frustration with the HOA color the situation. She reminded me, very carefully, of my contractual obligations and hinted that failure to perform could expose me to legal consequences. I let her finish. Then I responded the same way I always had, calmly. I referenced the force majeure clause, word for word. I told her law enforcement had documented the damage and that any further discussion would need to go through proper channels. She didn't like that. The storm didn't give her time to regroup. By nightfall, snow was coming down in thick, heavy sheets. Plows cleared the county highway regularly, but once you turned into Ridgeview Summit, it was a different world. Drifts formed fast. Vehicles slid sideways. By morning, the HOA roads were effectively shut down. That's when panic set in. My phone lit up nonstop. Residents asking when I'd be coming through. Parents worried about getting kids to school. A couple with an upcoming medical appointment begging for help. Some people were polite, even apologetic. Others were furious, like I'd personally summoned the storm just to inconvenience them. I answered when I could. I explained when I needed to. And every time, the answer was the same. The truck was destroyed. I physically could not plow. Elaine showed up the next morning. I saw her car struggle up the driveway before she got out, heels sinking into the snow. She didn't knock so much as bang on the door. When I opened it, she launched straight into a speech about emergencies, responsibilities, and how I was putting the entire community at risk. She demanded I find a way to plow immediately, rent equipment, borrow something, do whatever it took. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't block anyone's access. I just told her the truth, again. Without equipment, there was nothing I could do. That's when her composure cracked. Right there on my porch with snow swirling around us, she accused me of destroying my own truck. She said it loudly, confidently, like she'd rehearsed it. She claimed I was trying to extort the neighborhood by creating a crisis and forcing them to bend to my demands. A couple of nearby residents heard every word. In that moment, something shifted. I realized this had stopped being about snow, contracts, or even the truck. This was about power, about a person who believed authority meant reality could be rewritten if it was inconvenient. Elaine wasn't looking for solutions. She was looking for submission. I told her she needed to leave my property. I told her any further communication should go through attorneys. She stormed off without another word. As I watched her struggle back to her car, snow already filling in her footprints, I understood something clearly. The storm wasn't the turning point. Her accusation was. Because once someone is willing to invent a story to protect their control, they've already lost. By the following afternoon, Elaine went quiet. No calls. No emails. No public statements. In her place came Thomas Reed, the HOA vice president. His tone was noticeably different from hers, lower, measured, almost apologetic. He asked if we could talk man to man, as if that alone might reset everything that had already happened. When he arrived, he didn't step onto the porch the way Elaine had. He stayed at the edge of the driveway, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the snow-choked road behind him. He said he wanted to find a way through this before things got worse. I listened. Thomas admitted something that confirmed what I'd suspected for months. There had been closed-door board discussions about my truck. He chose his words carefully, but the meaning was clear. Elaine had pushed for what she called stronger action, not fines, not letters. Action. According to him, nothing specific had been voted on, nothing formally approved. But when I asked who shut it down, he didn't have an answer. He said people were uncomfortable. He said no one thought she'd actually do anything. He said it was just talk. And that's when I understood how these situations really happen, not through unanimous malice, but through quiet cowardice. When no one speaks up, the most reckless voice fills the room. I told Thomas I wasn't interested in blame shifting. I was interested in solutions. I laid out the only realistic option left. Emergency equipment rental, market rates, transparent costs. I even told him I'd work nonstop once the equipment was secured, just like I always had. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. He called it extortion. That word landed heavy, not because it was accurate, but because it revealed how badly they misunderstood the situation. Reality wasn't punishing them, it was simply presenting the bill. And they didn't like the number. Thomas left without an agreement. As his car disappeared into the white haze, the storm tightened its grip on the neighborhood. Snow fell without pause. Wind-sculpted drifts that swallowed curbs and signs. The HOA roads vanished completely, buried under layers of accumulation that only heavy equipment could clear. Behind the scenes, things were moving faster than the board realized. The sheriff's department hadn't let the case sit. Footage started coming in from nearby properties, grainy but clear enough to show two figures approaching my driveway in the early hours before dawn. Patterns emerged. Timing lined up. Investigators requested additional records. A search warrant was drafted. None of that was visible to the HOA. All they saw was a man they'd spent months antagonizing sitting warm and secure while their authority dissolved under snow. That contrast gnawed at them. I had power. I had heat. I had food. I had a generator humming steadily in the background. Not because I was hoarding or smug, but because living in the mountains teaches you to prepare. They hadn't prepared. They'd relied on control instead. As the roads became truly impassable and emergency access grew uncertain, tension reached a breaking point. The HOA leadership was trapped by its own decisions, and for the first time, there was no letter, no threat, no rule they could point to that would dig them out. The storm didn't care about titles. And neither did the truth, which was closing in quietly, step by step. The deputies came back just after sunrise, the sky still heavy and colorless from the storm. This time, there were more of them. Along with the familiar faces, a woman stepped forward and introduced herself as a detective from the County Investigations Unit. Her tone was calm, almost gentle, but there was nothing uncertain about what she said next. They told me, plainly and without dramatics, that they now had probable cause. This was no longer a vague investigation or a matter of looking into things. Evidence had stacked up faster than anyone on the HOA board expected. Footage from neighboring properties showed two figures approaching my driveway in the early hours before dawn, moving with purpose, not hesitation. Vehicle data placed one of the cars there at the same time. And beyond that, there were messages, texts, and emails that didn't just suggest frustration, but planning. Discussions about timing, about sending a message, about making sure the truck wouldn't be a problem anymore. The detective didn't speculate. She didn't need to. She explained what they could prove. Before noon, it was over. Elaine Parker was arrested that same day, along with another board member who had quietly supported her behind closed doors. Patrol cars rolled through Ridgeview Summit, lights flashing against the white walls of snowbanks. Neighbors stood at their windows or stepped onto porches, phones already in their hands. Word traveled instantly. In a place where gossip usually moves slowly, the truth spread faster than the storm ever had. One of them broke almost immediately. Faced with the evidence, the second board member didn't last long. She cooperated fully, handing over messages, explaining conversations, confirming timelines. She admitted what had been discussed during executive sessions. How Elaine had framed it as protecting the community. How objections were brushed aside. How silence had been taken as approval. Every detail she provided closed another door Elaine might have hoped to escape through. By evening, the story was everywhere. The HOA inbox went quiet. The management company stopped sending notices. Emails that had once arrived with legal threats and deadlines suddenly disappeared altogether. Residents who had defended Elaine days earlier stopped responding to messages. Others scrambled to distance themselves, insisting they had no idea anything like this could happen. The authority that once felt absolute evaporated overnight. There was no dramatic speech, no announcement declaring the HOA powerless. It simply collapsed under the weight of facts. Rules mean nothing when the people enforcing them are exposed as criminals. Titles don't protect you when evidence is public record. I watched it unfold from my living room, the generator humming steadily in the background. I felt relief, yes, but it was a muted kind. This wasn't victory. It was resolution arriving late, after damage had already been done. A truck destroyed. Roads buried. A community fractured. The next morning, I stepped outside and looked at my driveway again. Snow had partially covered the stains left by the leaked fluids, but the shape of what happened was still there, like a scar you notice even after it fades. I thought about how easily this could have been avoided. One board member speaking up. One person saying, "No, this isn't okay." That was all it would have taken. Instead, people had relied on authority to solve problems it created itself. Residents started reaching out, not with demands anymore, but with questions. What would happen next? Who was in charge? How long things would take to stabilize? I answered what I could and ignored the rest. For the first time since this started, the pressure wasn't on me. It was on the people who had abused power and assumed no one would ever challenge them. By nightfall, Ridgeview Summit felt different. Quieter, uncertain. The storm still surrounded us, but the tension had shifted. The fear wasn't about snow anymore. It was about accountability. About realizing that the structures people trust to protect them can just as easily harm them when no one is paying attention. The HOA hadn't just lost leadership, it had lost credibility. And once that's gone, no amount of paperwork can bring it back. The call came late in the afternoon, long after the patrol cars had left, and the reality of what happened had settled over the neighborhood like another layer of snow. The number on my phone was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. The man on the other end introduced himself as the HOA's attorney. His voice was careful, measured, and completely different from the tone I'd heard in past emails. There were no reminders of obligations this time. No veiled threats. Just an acknowledgement that the situation had changed. He got straight to the point. With the HOA president and another board member in custody, the remaining leadership wanted to stabilize the community as quickly as possible. He said they were prepared to cover the full replacement value of my destroyed truck. They would also pay for emergency rental equipment for the rest of the season. Most importantly, they were willing to transfer funds immediately, not weeks later, not after negotiations dragged on, but up front. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him I was willing to help, but only under conditions that were non-negotiable. Everything would be in writing. Not implied, not understood, written. The HOA would formally acknowledge my easement and my right to park commercial equipment on my property. Payment timelines would be explicit, with no room for reinterpretation later. And there would be a clear clause prohibiting retaliation of any kind. No fines, no selective enforcement, no quiet attempts to punish me down the road once things calmed down. There was a pause on the line. Papers shuffled. Then he said he understood. The agreement was drafted, reviewed, revised, and finalized in a matter of hours. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, the money was already in my account. Seeing it there wasn't satisfying so much as it was grounding. It meant the chaos was finally giving way to something concrete. I moved fast. Replacement plow trucks are hard to come by during an active storm, but money opens doors that had been closed the day before. By morning, I had a rental secured and parked in my driveway. I climbed into the cab just as fresh snow began falling again and started working. For the next 3 days, I plowed nearly non-stop, long stretches behind the wheel. Short breaks to refuel and stretch, clearing one buried road only to turn around and find another already filling back in. I worked until my arms ached and my eyes burned, because that's what the job required, not because anyone demanded it, but because people needed access again. As I moved through the neighborhood, reactions varied. Some residents stepped outside to thank me. A few handed me coffee or food, awkward but sincere. More than one apologized quietly, admitting they should have questioned what was happening sooner. Others stayed inside, watching from behind windows, unsure of what to say now that the story they'd believed had fallen apart. A small handful looked at me with open resentment, as if I were somehow responsible for the collapse of the authority they'd trusted. But it didn't matter anymore. They weren't in charge. The road slowly reappeared beneath the plow blade, dark asphalt cutting through the white. Emergency vehicles could get through again. Cars moved. Life resumed its familiar rhythm. And with every pass I made, something else was being cleared away too. Not snow, but the illusion that intimidation could ever replace accountability. By the time I parked the truck at the end of the 3rd day, exhausted and sore, Ridgeview Summit felt like a different place. Not perfect, not healed, but honest. And for the first time since this began, I knew the worst of it was finally behind us. Once the snow finally stopped and life in Ridgeview Summit began to move again, the consequences of what had happened settled in slowly but permanently. There was no dramatic announcement, no grand meeting where everything was suddenly fixed. Instead, the changes came piece by piece, the way real accountability usually does. Elaine Parker never returned to her position. Between the criminal charges, the public record, and the evidence that had come to light, her removal was not even debated. Her name vanished from HOA correspondence, then from the neighborhood entirely. Within a few months, her house went on the market. The board member who had cooperated with investigators accepted a plea deal that included probation, restitution, and community service. She sold her home shortly afterward and moved away quietly, leaving behind a reputation she couldn't outrun. The remaining board members were left to deal with the mess. Emergency meetings were held, this time with residents actually paying attention. Lawyers were present, so were uncomfortable questions. For the first time since the HOA's creation, people started asking what authority really meant and where it ended. One of the first formal actions taken was revising the covenants. The language that had once been vague and easily twisted was replaced with clear, unmistakable wording. Pre-existing easements and property rights were explicitly recognized. Enforcement procedures were tightened, requiring verification before violations could be issued. Limits were placed on unilateral action by the president. It passed by a wide margin, not because everyone suddenly agreed on everything, but because no one wanted to repeat what it had cost them. While the HOA was forced to reckon with itself, my own life moved forward in a different direction. The settlement money covered the loss of my truck, but the publicity did something unexpected. Word spread about how I'd handled the situation calmly, lawfully, without punishing neighbors who had nothing to do with it. More contracts came in. Other communities reached out. By the next season, I was able to buy a new truck, then another. For the first time, I hired help instead of doing everything myself. The work was still hard, but it felt different. Cleaner, earned. When the HOA elected a new president, it wasn't someone eager for control. It was Margaret Lewis, a retired teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for years and mostly kept to herself. At her first annual meeting, she stood in front of the room and thanked me by name, not for plowing, but for restraint, for staying professional when things could have turned ugly, for refusing to let anger make decisions that would have hurt everyone. That acknowledgement mattered more than she probably realized. These days, my truck sits in the same spot it always has, right at the entrance to Ridgeview Summit. It's visible. It's legal, and no one complains anymore. New families move in and don't give it a second glance. They just appreciate that when winter hits, the roads get cleared and life keeps moving. The neighborhood isn't perfect now. No community ever is. But it's quieter, more careful. And when disagreements come up, people remember what happens when authority is mistaken for entitlement. For me, the real resolution isn't the growth of my business or the change in leadership. It's the understanding that standing your ground doesn't require shouting. Sometimes, the strongest response is documentation, patience, and the willingness to let consequences unfold. And every time I pull into my driveway after a long night of plowing, I'm reminded that the space I occupy there isn't something I was given. It's something I proved I had every right to keep. When I look back on everything that happened, the storm and the destroyed truck aren't what stay with me the most. What lingers is how quickly a normal, peaceful community slid into chaos simply because people stayed quiet. One person decided the rules were tools to be used, not limits to be respected, and everyone else assumed it would never go too far. It always does. Not all at once, but slowly, until the damage is already done. I didn't win this by raising my voice or trying to embarrass anyone. I didn't punish neighbors who were just caught in the middle. I won by staying steady when emotions were loud, by writing things down when others tried to rewrite reality, and by trusting that facts eventually carry more weight than authority ever will. When people make reckless decisions, life doesn't argue with them. It sends the bill. Now the roads are clear. Cars come and go without spinning out or getting stuck. Meetings are shorter. Conversations are calmer. And my driveway looks exactly the same as it did before all of this started, with my truck parked right where it belongs. No explanations required. If there's a lesson in any of this, it's a simple one. Know your rights. Document everything. And don't mistake silence for safety. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?